Everybody. I'm Ben Ardell. I'm an assistant professor here in the English program at GGC, and I'm joined today by a fellow faculty member, Dr. David Weiss. This is the fifth installment in an occasional program that we've had for the past couple of years called English Degrees at Work. Our goal here is to really sing the praises of the English major and to think about its practical utility in the real world, both in the world of education and beyond. In the past, we've primarily talked with recent GGC alumni about their postgrad experiences with education and the workplace. Today, we are doing something different, but I think very exciting, talking with Dr. Weiss about his unique and I think important work history. So I have a number of questions for him. We also do want to hear from you all later today. So I just want to mention that we have the chat feature that's open. I think the talk will probably run about 45 minutes or so. And afterwards, we have plenty of time for Q&A. So if you want to pop a question in the chat box, you can feel free to do that. Or if you want to just jot it down, we can certainly come back to it later. But having said that, we'll go ahead and get started. And Dr. Weiss, my first question for you is to first just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to GGC.
Okay, so as you said, I do have a somewhat unusual background. Let's start with the not all that unusual stuff. I'm from New York originally, from Brooklyn, a place called Canarsie, which is not the best. It's even today, it's not the best. It's not the cool part of Brooklyn. It's deep in the heart of Brooklyn. And certainly when I was born in the 1960s, it was not. It was by no means a cool place. But nevertheless, I love New York and I love Brooklyn. But I've been down here in Atlanta for about 30 years, so quite a while. That pretty much makes me, I guess, an Atlanta, more than an Atlanta resident, an Atlanta native by many standards. And what brought me down here originally was my job, and I'll talk about my job a little bit in a little while. So here's the unusual part. So here I am, I'm an English professor here at GGC, but I am a business person or a former business person. I was a CPA, certified public accountant, and the chief financial officer, CFO, of a public company, a home builder. Oh, let's let Jerry in. A home builder named Beazer Homes, which is one of the largest home builders in the country, and it's based here in Atlanta. So how is it that a business person is teaching English composition at GGC? Well, it goes back to my undergrad experience. In undergrad, I have, hey, Jerry. Hey. Undergrad, I have 2 degrees. I have a degree in English and a degree in accounting. So right from the start, I had that balance. And when I started working, I started working as an accountant. And I'll go into more of my background. But I always knew that I really liked English. And that's really why I took it in college. You know, the line I give is the accounting was to get a job, the English, because that's what I wanted, an education. And that's what I really enjoyed. Which is true. So I was a business person for many years, and fortunately that worked out well. And I got to retire at a very young age in my 40s from business, and spent some time helping take care of my kids. I was soccer dad and room parent. And then said, well, now that the kids are growing up, I want to go back to school for my PhD in English. And my particular passion is Shakespeare, and that is what I studied. So I did a PhD through the University of Birmingham in the UK, and the Shakespeare Institute in Stratford-upon-Avon, and did my thesis on Shakespeare and another poet who wrote at the time named Samuel Daniel, and absolutely extra points to anyone who asks me about Samuel Daniel or even about Shakespeare. So I've always had that mix of English and business, which I think is a phenomenal mix. And the principal message, which we'll come back to later during this talk, I realize that's an unusual background. It's my contention that I was successful in business. I became a CFO at a young age. I retired at a young age. It's my contention that my success in business is much more due to my background in English than into accounting and finance and all the technical classes that I took. That the skills that you hone through an English education, if you're an English major, or even if you're not an English major, just the things that you study in your English classes are critically important to you, no matter what you do. So that's sort of the what brings me here and the link to my unusual background.
Great. Yeah, thank you. And I guess, I'd maybe like to stick with that idea a little bit. And, I imagine that many people are a bit confused or maybe don't have a clear understanding of what, the day-to-day responsibilities of a CFO entail,
Mhm.
or how an English background might be useful or relevant
Mhm.
to that work. So maybe we should stick with that idea for a little bit, and if you could maybe just talk a little bit more about what your job actually looked like at that time and how you found yourself drawing on some of those skills from your English background.
Sure. Well, first off, let me start with, I believe there are three critical skills that you get in an English class that you don't get from an accounting class or a finance class or a nursing class or a computer science class. Number one, the ability to write. And writing is still important. You write in almost any job. So as the CFO of a company, among my responsibilities was to write things like our annual report. Once a year, you put out a big report about how we have done. And it doesn't just have numbers, it has all sorts of words. So my company, Beazer Homes, I took them public. That means we were a newly public company. We did an initial public offering. So I had to write personally our first annual report. Had no template for that. It didn't exist before. So that's a good example of what a higher level accountant does that involves writing that you wouldn't think about. Or I would make presentations to investors, people who owned our stock, who I wanted them to own our stock. I would write that. Or every quarter, we would put out our earnings and someone had to write up a press release about that. I would write that as the CFO. Not all CFOs do that, but because I had that ability, it did fall on me. But then going back earlier in my career, so I started as an accountant at the accounting firm called Deloitte, which is a very big accounting firm, international. I worked at the New York office at the World Trade Center, fortunately many years before 9/11, but my office was on the 99th floor of #1 World Trade Center. And even then, writing was really important. And I can attribute, for instance, one of the things that moved me along was a memo I wrote that one of my clients really was impressed with. And that client ultimately hired me, and they owned a company called Beazer Homes. And that's how I ended up at Beazer Homes ultimately. So writing that memo in an effective way was critically important. So number one skill is writing. Number two skill is the ability to analyze complex situations. What I describe it as situations that don't have clear answers. You don't have a multiple choice in most cases in the workplace. Certainly that was true in accounting, and I'm sure it's true in everybody's work. In fact, not only don't you know the answers, you don't even know the questions. You have to make up your own, you have to determine where the questions are. What should I be answering in this? And when I wrote that memo, I kind of made up the question and made up my own answer. English teaches you that. When you look at a book like Narrative Life of Frederick Douglass and you need to write about it, what are you going to write about? There's not a clear answer to that, and there certainly isn't clear where you're going to find it. So English teaches you that those critical analytical abilities to take complex situations that are uncertain and to analyze them in some organized fashion and put it into something. Then lastly, the ability to communicate, even absent writing, to take, again, difficult, perhaps technical topics and present it in a way that non-technical people can understand. And if you're in nursing, you certainly have to do that. And you need to explain medical things to people who don't understand medical things and are probably worried about what they're about to hear. English gives you the ability to do that. And an accounting standpoint, actually, I've got a demonstration of a good example of where I could present in a difficult situation. And I think my English skills help me much more than my accounting skills. Do you mind if I share a little bit?
Sure, yeah, go ahead. I think you should be set up to do so. So this is a short video.
It is going to be about 2 minutes.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so we will watch about 2 minutes of an interview that I did with CNBC in 2001, which, as my students pointed out to me, is roughly when they were born. So for some of them, it was before they were born. We'll watch 2 minutes of this.
Every day, more companies lower earnings guidance and complain about the economy. But in the home building sector, everything seems to be just fine, thank you. The most recent positive news comes from Beazer Homes, which says it expects third-quarter earnings to exceed analysts' expectations. Those expectations call for a profit of $1.71 a share. The stock ended up about a quarter yesterday. It's traded in a 52-week range of 69 to 18. But take a look at this nice-looking chart, now trading right around the high at 66. Let's find out the home builder's secret. Joining us from Atlanta today, David Weiss, Beazer Homes CFO. Mr. Weiss, good to have you with us.
Good morning, Maria.
So have you seen a change in business over the last 3 months?
Over the last 3 months, it's been extremely strong. Actually, we've reported earnings for the last quarter up 30% or over 30%. So it's extremely strong. If any change, I would say it's even stronger demand at the lower price points.
Are you expecting things to slow down in the coming months?
No, we're not. We see a huge pent-up demand for housing. Basically, we have underproduced as an industry the houses needed for the growth in population of the last decade, and we see that pent-up demand being met over the next decade.
Well, let me ask you a question.
Okay, that's probably enough of that. I can stop share, fun as that is. So when you're becoming an accountant, you don't expect you're going to be doing that.
So when you go on a national cable show like that, what kind of material are you given in advance? How much information do you know about what the expectations are for a segment like that? And I guess, to sort of tie it back to English, what skills do you find yourself leaning on doing that kind of work?
Yep. Well, let me just say they weren't nearly as nice as you were, providing me with a list of questions before this thing we're sitting down. Nothing. The answer is I got nothing. And in fact, found out the day ahead of time that I was going to be doing the interview. And it came down to a question of who was available, me or the CEO of the company. And I happened to be available for that one. And I did it a couple of times. So you really don't know what you're going to be asked. I may have an idea at the time. So this is in 2001. Technology stocks had been starting coming down. All of a sudden, home builders, people were interested. Our stock was going up. So I knew they'd talk to me about the stock and expectations for the company. But absent that, really no information. And there was no teleprompter. I'm sitting in a room in Atlanta. She's in New York. There's little prep work. So coming back to your English skills, it becomes a matter of, number one, before I got there, I had a long list of things that they might ask and thought about how would I answer such things, including things like, why is there a demand for housing, which is still true today. And going through it, and one of the things I emphasize to my students is that you really need to edit, that there's a first draft and then there's a later version. So the night before, I'm doing what in my head is the first draft of what I'm going to talk about, if they ask certain questions. And she didn't ask all of them, some of them she did. And I go, here's what I want to talk about. Here's what I want to emphasize. So effectively, it was like doing an English essay, but getting ready for it on the fly. And so that element of editing and going through your words is part of it. But the biggest piece, I think, is simply thinking about how to present something, how to make an argument, how to use rhetoric, how to go through, and as I said before, how to simplify a message. This is going out to a national audience, not people who follow home builders or even necessarily stocks. So how do I make it simpler? So for instance, saying we don't have enough houses for the growth in population from the past decade. which was true. And there was a lot of immigration in the decade preceding that, so something people can understand and presenting it. So I think there's a lot of English skills in that. There's very little accounting in that or finance in that.
And just to be clear, because I think this is an important point, especially for folks who haven't done a lot of public speaking in the past. When you say first draft, I assume you mean an actual first draft. Were you writing out potential responses? Yes.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I'm a different people have different ways of handling things like that. For me, I definitely write it down, and sometimes I record it as well. And that's another thing that I tell my students, that when you record yourself speaking, you catch things that sound awkward and you come up with better ways of doing it. I recommend to them, especially if they've submitted a paper that sounds awkwardly worded, read it to yourself. I bet you'll see where you can improve it, and then say it out loud to yourself. So yeah, I would do that for that. I would say, okay, if she asks about housing potentially turning down and where's the demand coming from, here's an answer. And I write it down and I record it, listen to myself, edit, come back and say. Now, it's tough to remember all that on the fly like that, but practice it helps. That's where you get to performance skills more than English skills. But it starts with that prep work and with the same things that go into essay writing. Write it down, edit it, record it, listen to yourself. I think those are important things to be doing. Excellent.
We can certainly maybe even come back to, or if you'd like, we could talk a little bit more about some career applications for English as well. Perhaps maybe if you even, I don't know, are able to think back to earlier on in your career, if there are relevant connections that you'd like to make, maybe we can mention those now, or we can shift to some other areas, whichever you prefer.
No, I think let's stay with that for a minute.
Sure.
Let's go early in my career, because I know it's some people, the students here, many are studying English. They're not intending on being accountants. Maybe it looks a little different. So let's go back to my very first job interview. And what I would say is that, I was going and interviewing with a number of accounting firms. And when the people would pick up my resume or CV, and it looks just like everyone else's, but then you hit English. And not only English, you hit Shakespeare. And it's a point of interest. It's a point of, something to talk to people about. And it really gives you the basis of selling it, of saying why it was worthwhile to you. Now, I think it's really most effective when combined, if you have the combination of a technical degree and an accounting degree, that's an awesome combination. And I recommend to my students, if you are a nursing major or a health science major, and you're good at English, think about a second major. And similarly, I would say to the English majors, think about if you might want to go on and get another degree that's more technical, you'll be at an advantage relative to others in those interviews. And I think on the job as well, because of your English skills. So sell those English skills. Don't oversell them. Don't make yourself out to be an expert in whatever that company does, but do talk about how you can help them with your language skills. If you're looking towards business, let's say you're an English major and you want to work for a company, do research on that company. Think about doing things like investor relations or marketing, all of which involve communications. And sell yourself to the company and your skills to that company. Number one, by doing a lot of research. Number two, being enthusiastic, showing why you're interested in specifically that company. And number three, how your communication skills and English skills can help them. So I think going back to day one of the interview, it's something to keep in mind of what benefit. And ideally, you have an interview who has an interest in that. Not all do, but many do, because most resumes look pretty similar. So English starts to stand out as a little different.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. And there, for folks who are interested in that idea, There are others who have made a similar point. There's an article that I've shared with some of my student interns in the past. I believe the author's name is Brandon Bastide, and he was drawing on a survey of employers that said that there is an overwhelming preference for students who had a combination of a humanities major and a more technical certificate. So given the choice of three different options, say a person with a cybersecurity certification, an English major, or both, right, or a certificate in one of those areas and a bachelor's degree in another, they overwhelmingly preferred the applicant who had those multiple skills.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I've seen a lot of articles about that, how employers are going back to those more generalizable skills, the ability to analyze things, the ability to think critically, the ability to write. And another point about that, going back to very early in my career, a big thing that I remember about starting in accounting is an accounting education in no way prepares you to be an accountant. And you basically learn on the job. And I think that's true of many, many. It gets your ticket in the door, but what I actually did on a day-to-day basis, I learned very little of it. I mean, things like fixing the copy machine, which is one of the most important skills you can have in life. Fixing the copy, at least back in the day, that was very important. But the skills that you actually use on the job are going to be very different, likely, than what you took in your classes that supposedly were preparing you to do that very technical thing. Certainly, that was true in accounting and business.
Great. Let's talk a little bit, if we can. I think that some people would be interested in hearing a little bit more about your educational experience. So particularly, if we go back to your undergraduate years, the fact that you were a dual major. And I'm curious in particular if that was a result of any pressures, possibly family pressures, or what led you to be a dual major? Did you always know you wanted to be an English major? And is there anything else that seems important about that time for you?
Well, I started as an accounting major, so that was one. It wasn't so much family pressure as it was my life experience. So my family, unfortunately, my dad died when I was fairly young, and my family did not have very much money. And we started up a business, which was a big mistake. So I'm in my teens, and we have this business selling sneakers, and the business is going bankrupt. And I always remember we had an accountant, and he wrote the checks. And the first check he wrote was to himself. And I said, that's the job I want. Not that I want bankrupt companies, but I want the thing that's secure. So I knew right off the bat I wanted to be an accountant. And I was very fortunate. I got into University of Pennsylvania, which has the Wharton School, which is one of the top business schools in the country, but also has a wonderful English program. And even getting into that school, I think the combination of English and math helped. That I was good at math, but I had both skills. But as soon as I got there and I started taking English classes, I really loved it. I mean, especially the Shakespeare classes. And I had studied Shakespeare a bit before then, but that's when it really took off for me. And when I found that by just taking a few extra, by putting in my English classes into the electives and taking a few extra courses, I could get a second degree. I just wanted to do that because, to some extent it was marketability, but to a great extent it was simply because I thought that was going to be fun, which it was. I mean, it was tough having an English major at University of Pennsylvania is not the easiest thing, but those were my fun classes. The accounting classes, not so much. So I did the accounting for a job and the English for fun, but always with the idea that maybe eventually I would do something with it. And throughout my business career, I always had a view to retire early, that there were other things I wanted to do with my life, not be an accountant for life. Frederick Douglass talks about he didn't want to be a slave for life. I didn't want to be an accountant for life. And so when I saw, I always had my view on that. And when I found the opportunity, I did retire from it because the stock did well and I was able to sell it. and had a plan to go back to school for my PhD. So it starts with the undergrad. Yes, I'm an accountant. Yes, I had to get a job in accounting and it paid well, but it was a plan to just move on from that. So that started from undergrad and continued through my 20 some odd year business career.
And we should probably say maybe a little bit more about the decision to go back to school. I know I've encountered this with undergraduate students, maybe you have as well. But the idea that someone would graduate from college and then work for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, and go back to graduate school, strikes many young people as strange. I certainly don't think it's strange. There are various versions of that. I'm curious, when you went back to graduate school, how unique, did your experience seem amongst your peers? Do you think that there was anything about it that made the process of doing a PhD easier? How did that affect you, having that extra time and experience?
Okay, well, thank you for that. That's a great series of questions. Well, first off, let me say that we all can have multiple lives in our life. And the idea of going back to school or doing whatever it is you want to do in your 50s or 60s. So I started back on my PhD in my mid 50s, now in my early 60s. And so you can have multiple careers, multiple lives. So, and more and more people, I mean, you probably have it in your class, you see the non-traditional student, people who, maybe they were in the military and they're coming back to it, or maybe it's a mom who the kids are now getting older. And so, they have more time. So there are more and more non-traditional students at all levels throughout the education system. So you shouldn't feel daunted by it. It helped that part of the reason I chose the particular school that I did, the University of Birmingham in the UK, is they had what they refer to as a distance learning program. So most of it could be done from my home in Atlanta. 2 weeks out of every year for 3 years, I would go over there and do my studies there. It would actually be 3 weeks. But when you do a PhD, it's really research-based. So you really could be doing it from anywhere. I mean, there were parts where I saw actual original manuscripts that had to be done at the British Library, but most of it could be done from anywhere. So that distance learning helped with it. It wasn't that unusual in that in being a distance learning, I started with a group of about 60 students, most of whom were older. I was perhaps among the oldest, but not the oldest. And so there was a wide range of ages in that, from very young. And I found people just open to it. I think students are open to it. There's a shared experience that helps, and a collegiality that comes with it. With respect to did my work experience help? Massively. The idea of staying organized, the idea of communicating well with my supervisors, being able to, the people, two supervisors, one was one of the lead editors of the Oxford Shakespeare, so a very busy, very high up guy. I had to know exactly how to say to him what I needed from him, and even then he wouldn't always respond, but to get their attention. And I had learned that through business. In business, you learn, how do you get someone's attention? How do you get them to answer an email? What facts can I tell them? And this is something I tell my students in my classes. I encourage them to email me on any topic. You're not gonna be in class, great, send me an email. You're gonna be late, great, send me an email. You're uncertain about an assignment, great, send me an email. The ability to communicate effectively and use email is a critical skill. And as we know, not many do it. And there are many in academia who don't use it well. And coming to a PhD with a business background, as I say to some people in academia, there are times when I'll send an email to a fellow professor or whoever and won't get a response for a week. At work, I would have been fired for that. And I got hundreds of emails a day. Every single one was answered within 24 hours, even if the answer is, I'll get back to you. So when you come to a PhD program, that was very helpful. The organizational skills that you learn on the job, because juggling a PhD with a life is very tough. So it definitely did help.
And in terms of your graduate experience, because I know there are always people who are thinking about the possibility of graduate school in the future, what would you say was the most difficult part of the adjustment for you going back to school and working on a dissertation and doing that kind of work?
Probably the most difficult, and I don't think this is specific to going back to school later, although it becomes a little bit tougher because your memory is not as good. But it's sort of maintaining the discipline, keeping motivated. You're very removed from it's not like being among classmates. You're on your own. It's a very solitary project, as all of us who have done PhDs can attest to. And especially if you have a life going on, as everyone does. Kids, a spouse, it's really tough to keep motivated, to keep driven. The thing that I will say helped me a lot with it, I had great supervisors. I would email with my principal supervisor at least weekly and did Zoom calls with her back the day before. This is before COVID, so this was new. Would have Zoom calls monthly. And she would really help me. Doing it without supervision, I think I would have given up. It would have been tough. So she helped, then myself as well. Keeping to a schedule, knowing I have so many pages to write by next week or 3 weeks from now. Here's the research I want to do. And for those of you who haven't tried the PhD yet, one of the most daunting aspects is if you have no idea what you're going to find and what you're going to write about. Which is something I emphasize to my students as well with any research project, but it's especially true of a PhD, which what you're told when you're doing a PhD is you have one requirement: discover something new. I'm writing about Shakespeare. I'm not going to find something new about Shakespeare, but I did. And so it's daunting and it's difficult. And so keeping up diligence and keeping yourself motivated is very, very tough. It's wonderful. I mean, it's, it really, I would recommend it to people, but recognize going into it, you need to devote a lot of time to it. To keep up. If you think you're just going to do it on the side part-time, it's going to be very, 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 very tough.
Sure. And probably one of the biggest adjustments for people who are entering into graduate school in the humanities is becoming accustomed to the writing requirements, right? As an undergraduate, you can get by as an English major if you love to read. Certainly, as a graduate student, you really have to love to write. What was that process like for you? About how many hours a day would you say you spent thinking about writing as you were working on your PhD?
Well, certainly working on the PhD was a full-time plus, so it was 40 hours a week plus in terms of working on it one way or another, doing research. The writing would sometimes be more, sometimes less. I was always doing some writing. And towards the end, it was mostly writing and editing. So the word count requirement there was 80,000 words, not including appendices, which is pretty thick. And actually, what I found that I think most people find, the word limit is actually more difficult to get it down to that level if you've done the research than it is to get to that level if you really know what you want to write about. So yeah, that continual process of always be writing, always be editing, and figure out what's going to be in and out of it, give it a structure, come up with chapters, what's going to go into this chapter. Maybe you rearrange the chapters. Maybe you want to write the intro first, or maybe you don't. Maybe you want to just get right into the meat of a particular middle section of it. It's tough. And again, I'll come back to good supervision helps a lot. I tell my students, writing is, you think it's a solitary process. It is to a great extent, but it's also a collaborative process. You don't know how your writing is coming across until you share it with someone. And even early on in the process, describing how you want to organize it and what you want to put where, getting input from someone else is very helpful. But yeah, the writing, I mean, that's the part I dread. I still, to this day, I love research. And I think about, I also have gotten a scholarly article published in the Huntington Library Quarterly, which was an awful lot of work. And I think about doing more of that. But the actual writing, I do find very daunting. It's tough. It remains tough. It's hard work. Yeah.
And thinking about, where the PhD has brought you, right here to GGC, I think a lot of people would be curious to hear, especially as someone who has, experience in different realms, what you like about teaching here at GGC, and how shifting from your previous career to teaching has been for you. What do you think are maybe the benefits or the more enjoyable parts of it?
Yeah, well, first off, I love GGC. I mean, I had no, I'll be honest, I had never heard of GGC until, 3 or 4 years ago. But I found it's really a special place. I mean, I don't know of other schools that are exactly like it. It's a driven student body and a committed faculty and staff administrators who just are committed to the students in a way that it's really overwhelming. And I was lucky to have been hired by GGC. So I didn't get a PhD in order to teach. It wasn't like that was my principal objective. But when I got done with it, I said, yeah, I'd like to try that. And I just thought, oh, okay, now I've written about Shakespeare. Someone's going to want me to talk about Shakespeare. And I found, no, unfortunately, I'm going to be delivering the tough message to you. If you are going for a PhD in Shakespeare or in English in general, it's tough to get a job. It is. I mean, it's those jobs teaching the things that are the higher level. There aren't that many of them, and there are a lot of very qualified people to do it. So I'm sorry to deliver that tough message. Doesn't say abandon. I'm not saying abandon it, but I'm saying it's tough. So I found that the idea of teaching English, that wasn't going to happen. I was simply someone who had no teaching experience and was a business person. Yeah, good for you. You got a PhD. But I found there was a very high demand for English composition. I saw a lot of listings for that. And even at that, it took some convincing. I sent in my CVs to a number of places and never heard back. But I sent it to Mike Fournier here at GGC, who himself, the head of our English department, has a business background. And he said, yeah, there's real value to getting someone with a diverse background, a business background, who also has a PhD in English in front of our students, and someone who's older and has a diverse experience. So he interviewed me and said, yeah, I'll give you a shot. Yeah, yes, you've never taught, but let's see how you do. And this was in 2019, I guess. It was the fall of 2019. It was my first time in front of a class, and yeah, that was daunting. But I took to it right. I loved it right away. I mean, the interacting with students is just it gives me a whole different perspective that I would not otherwise have. I tell my students, when you come to the class, my objective, and it should be your objective, if you leave this class as a better, more confident writer, regardless of your level of writing ability, you may not be a good writer, certainly not a great writer, you still may not be a good writer when you leave, but if you're a better writer than when you came in, then you succeeded, you'll do fine, and I succeeded, and that's our main purpose. I think that message, appeals. So anyway, I love teaching. There was a semester during the COVID where I wasn't needed, and I was bummed out by that, and glad to be back teaching in person, which I much prefer. This semester, teaching 2 sections of English 1102. So I don't know if I covered all your points, but
no, yeah, that was perfect. Thank you. I think this might be a good opportunity for us to maybe shift to Q&A.
Sure. Actually, I have a question from Princess.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's a great question. Hi, Princess. So the question is, I'm wondering what you mean by collaborative process in writing. It's a great question. So writing, you sit and you write by yourself, but what you write is in your own head. And even when you read it back, especially if you don't read it out loud, it's still in your head. And if you read it out loud, it's just you just really don't know how it's coming across. And so showing it to someone else and getting their honest feedback is a really important part of the writing process. I encourage my students to do it. There's some element of requirements of sharing it and getting critiques, but even if that's not required, share it with someone. Share it with a fellow student, share it with your mom, share it with a sibling, give an early draft to your professor. I know almost all professors would be happy to look at an early draft as long as they're given enough time to review it. And you'll get a different perspective on it. Or even if it's not an early draft, talk to someone about it and tell them what you're thinking of writing about. And maybe they'll give you some feedback. You don't have to take all of it, but hearing the feedback is important. So that's what I meant by it's a collaborative process. You're very welcome, Princess.
Great. Yeah, thank you. And of course, I have a few more additional questions that we can maybe take up as well, but I do want to give people an opportunity to ask questions if anybody has them. So feel free to use the chat box. We'll give you a second or two to kind of collect your thoughts. If you want to, might be easier too to just pop on your mic. You can pop on your camera as well.
I have a question.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, Miriam, go ahead.
Okay, my question was about, you were speaking about how studying Shakespeare helped you a lot. And maybe I missed it, but I wanted to know more about how studying his work helped you with your English and public speech and all that.
Thank you. Great question. Well, Shakespeare, I think, just is wonderful for everyone. I mean, I just think there's so much in Shakespeare. He presents such a wide variety of situations and personalities. So reading and understanding Shakespeare and seeing him in his plays and performance. I'm on the board of the Atlanta Shakespeare Company, the Shakespeare Tavern. I recommend it. Watch films of it. The new Macbeth film is very good. But I've even developed actually a course called Warriors for the Working Day, Shakespeare for Business. And maybe I'll put a link to my YouTube channel, and I've got an introductory to it. So studying, for instance, the particular plays I focus on are Richard II, Henry IV, parts 1 and 2, and Henry V, which is sometimes referred to as the Henriad. And it follows a succession through from the overthrow of one king, how his successor did, and then how the son of the successor does. And I learned more from those plays that I used in business than any business class. For instance, in Richard II, you learn how to deal with a narcissistic boss. There are varying ways that's shown there. Some are more effective than others. And I actually both wrote about that. By the way, I also have an MBA, a Master's in Business Administration. I wrote a final paper on that topic on the leadership lessons in Shakespeare's plays for my MBA. My professor loved it. And I can definitely tell you, I used the lessons in there, knowing that you can't fool a narcissist person. You can't just humor them. You have to show them you're working for their interests. But you need to be careful about your own interests as well, and always be cautious. So I got a lot from Richard II in that. Or from Henry IV, part 1, the young prince is learning from those around him and is in amongst the troop, what will ultimately be his troops. And he hangs out with Falstaff. And he learns how he's going to motivate people when he gets to be a leader. And I think there's more on that in Shakespeare than in any leadership book you'll ever read on business. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Welcome. We have a long question from SM. Sandra.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and read it for you. She writes, so I'm a senior CMAP major. That's our cinema, media, and arts production program. Majoring with a concentration in screenwriting, who's finishing up the English minor. I find that there's always been this stigma around English majors, and so I stayed away, yet I enjoy writing and have always wanted to get a job with writing, whether journalism, publishing, etc. I've been looking towards the writing and rhetoric major instead of just doing the English minor. Do you think I should go for it? Uh-oh, big questions here. Or would a minor in English do just as well as having an English major?
It is a big, very difficult question, and you have to figure out about in your own life. Can you do that? I don't know, are you working part-time or full-time? Can you really do a second major? If you can somehow fit it in, I think the answer is yes, doing the full major would make a difference. Doing a minor is nice and you can certainly sell it, but I don't know if you caught what I was talking earlier about when you're in a job interview. and you show that you are a film major, CMAP major, and a full English major, it makes an important point of conversation and really makes you stand out. So I understand what you're saying about the stigma of English majors. If you were solely an English major, I've heard all the things about, yeah, so I hope you're happy, making coffee at Starbucks. And I think it's awful. I mean, people who say things like that. English majors can get jobs, do get jobs, and are critically important. But certainly in combination with another major, it's really powerful. So I'd recommend you to go for it if you can fit it into your life. But don't kill yourself because it's important to determine that work-life balance.
And I'll just mention a quick thing following up for Sandra. Another thing to think about as well is other types of opportunities that you can gain kind of related to or adjacent to the major. One really good opportunity that we have here on campus is working for the GGC Globe, which is our student newspaper. I'll pop a link in the chat, or somebody else can feel free to pop a link in the chat there as well. But they are always looking for student writers, editors, people to help out with web design, analytics, things of that sort. And that can be a really good opportunity to explore some of those interests and do it in a really tangible, real world way that can actually build up your resume for the future, right? So it's not necessarily an either or, but, as Dr. Weiss was saying, what fits or what makes the most sense for you. And, I think it can be a really good way, especially if you have an interest in something like journalism. The degree is nice, but in addition to that degree, if you're ever to work in a journalistic field, you need real writing samples from the world. And the Globe is a great way to get that kind of experience.
I'm glad you mentioned that. I forgot to mention that in my undergraduate background, I did write for the Daily Pennsylvanian. I was their theater critic.
Interesting.
So yes, and that is another point of interest, and it certainly helps with your writing and helps give examples of it.
You were a very busy undergraduate student, double major, accounting and English, and working for the student newspaper.
And I ended up being the chairman of the Spring Fling committee. Spring Fling was a big annual festival in my senior year. I did do that. So yeah, I like being busy.
Wow.
But when I retired early in my 40s, I got the same question from different people, asked different ways, and I could always tell a lot about the person. The question is, what are you going to do? And it could either be asked of, wow, you're in your 40s, what are you going to do with yourself? Or like, wow, what are you going to do? And to me, there's so many things to do. I was never bored. I was never not busy, even in retirement. So there are lots of things to do. Yeah.
A related question that we didn't actually get to, but it might be worth mentioning right now. Obviously with the long gap between graduate school and undergrad, I'm sure one question that people maybe have is, to what extent, if any, was your love of like Shakespeare or literature in general a part of your life? How did you kind of keep that aspect of your identity around, alive, healthy? Is there anything you want to say on that front?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it was very, very important. I did keep it alive, and I was doing my own research before I knew it was anything like a PhD. When I retired, I had a list of things that I might do: write a book, try to get a scholarly article published about Shakespeare. And along the way, I came across this other poet and playwright named Samuel Daniel, who I knew Shakespeare had used as one of his sources. And there wasn't that much written about him, and it always intrigued me. So I did a lot of reading about Samuel Daniel. I read some of his works and was studying them on their own before I ended up applying for a PhD. And that ended up being really important because the bottom line was I was not qualified for the PhD that I applied for. The PhD, I was supposed to have a graduate degree in English. I didn't. I have undergrad degrees in English and accounting. I do have a master's, but it's an MBA. And because number one, I had that paper, remember I talked about, I wrote at Wharton, about Shakespeare. I was able to say about how even in my MBA, I used Shakespeare. And then I wrote to the person who ended up being my supervisor about my research I had done independently and how and she had written about Samuel Daniel as well. And what I wanted to cover and why I wanted to do it. And she was just amazed that anyone had heard of Samuel Daniel out in the real world and had done research. And she said to me, for instance, I said I've been reading his works on Ebo, early English books online. And she said, how have you ever even heard of Ebo? And I said, well, I go to the Emory Library and they've got it there. And so, yeah, I was doing my own research independently for fun along the way, and it helped lead to the PhD. Research, I love research. Like I said, writing, I have a tough time with. I have a love-hate relationship with it. But research is a pure love relationship.
Which reminds me of another thing that people sometimes say about doing a PhD. It's a thing that you feel you have to do, right? That you would be doing otherwise, even if you weren't enrolled in a graduate program. That can be a good way to assess if graduate school is right for you. Is this something you are already doing on your own?
I think that's a great way to put it. Yeah, I mean, it is. It's something you really have to feel a need. It's like being an author. You should write a book only if you have that book that you absolutely have to write, and you won't allow yourself to not do it. Same thing with a PhD. Now, for some it's a job requirement, and that's very, very tough. I know a number of people that I went to this grad school with who it's tough, if you're doing it simply because it's required for your job. It's much better if you feel that passion for what you're studying and researching, and for the research itself.
Do we have any other questions from folks? These have been good questions so far. Anything else that anyone would like to ask?
We had one question about Shakespeare. Anyone want to ask about Samuel Daniel?
Well, I think you should just tell us about Samuel Daniel. You've teased us enough with Samuel Daniel. What do we need to know about Samuel Daniel?
So the biggest thing is, so he was a very major author during Shakespeare's time, as big as Shakespeare, and they're almost exact contemporaries. So he was, especially at the early parts of their career, they were both very, very big. Now, Daniel was not a popular playwright the way Shakespeare was. He was more a poet to the nobility. He wrote what was referred to as closet tragedies, things that would be read out loud. But he wrote a long epic poem about what we refer to today as the Wars of the Roses, the civil wars between the houses of Lancaster and York. And it was one of Shakespeare's principal sources for his history plays, even though it was written roughly the same time. And I found much more interaction between their works during that time than has been discovered before. So that's what my thesis was about, which, before we leave, I'll try to put up if you look, my academia, there's a lot on my academia.edu that will give you links to everything. So my thesis was about that. And I've also, here's another little sales pitch I do. When I mentioned one semester I wasn't teaching here at GGC, what I decided to do was rewrite the Wikipedia page on Samuel Daniel. So go to the Wikipedia page on him, and that was entirely written by me. It used to be a very short, very inaccurate, very bad page, and now it's a long, very, very, I think, well done page about Samuel Daniel. So that's another good thing for English majors to do. Fix Wikipedia.
Great, thank you. And folks can just search your name on academia.edu if they're unfamiliar with it. It's just a repository where scholars will oftentimes post their work. So yeah, thank you for mentioning that. Anyone else with any questions? I think we do have another question from Sarah. Sarah says, my dream job is to be a part-time fiction writer, but I don't have a clear idea of any stable writing careers I could invest in until then. Do you have any suggestions?
Stable writing careers to be a fiction writer. Well, writing is in a great variety of roles. I mean, the ones that I am most aware of are in business, so I can speak to those. The ones that I would particularly cite are investor relations and marketing. So my advice would be take a look, especially public companies, meaning companies that have stock traded on maybe the New York Stock Exchange or other stock exchanges. They all have departments of investor relations who have to write about the company and communicate to their investors. And especially those that are based here in Atlanta or have regional headquarters here in Atlanta. Take a look at their websites and investor relations, marketing, public relations. Those are all great. Internal relations, communications, absolutely. And what I would tell you is find a company that you really want to work for and learn a lot about them. Now, it's great if they're looking for someone in one of these areas. So yeah, look at the job postings. But even if not, identify the company, Home Depot, Delta, the Gwinnett Braves, where I know the Braves anymore, wherever they are. And take a look on their website and find out who is the person in each of these areas, who is in investor relations, and email them. Say, hey, I love Delta, I love Home Depot. And I know you have a big investor relations department. I'd really be interested in being a part of it. Here's my resume. I hope I could have an opportunity to talk to you about it. So, I can't stress enough showing enthusiasm for the specific company that you're talking to, because so many interviewees don't do that. They show up without knowing about it. And here's the other little tip. So in my class, the theme of my class is Wrote My Way Out. And I say that Frederick Douglass, he has a part where he says he wrote his own pass. There's a piece of paper that literally he wrote that helped him escape. He forged, a pass to get him out. And I said, I think there are examples in the modern world where you can write your own pass, where you can get yourself out of your situation through your writing. And we debate it. And one sounds like a small one that I say is a thank you note after an interview. So many people don't do it. So write a thank you note, at a minimum an email, thanking them and citing specific things from the interview. Even better, write a handwritten. Buy a little thank you note, handwrite it, send it in. That could be your writing, demonstrating how you have an appreciation of writing, and really will help you to stand out. I know when I was hiring, if I interviewed 10 people and 5 didn't send me a thank you note, those were 5 who were ruled out automatically, almost regardless of how qualified they were. But anyway, so seeking the right company, showing enthusiasm, identifying an area you want to be in, and those are all great examples. Hope that helped.
Yeah, thank you for that. Anybody else with any questions? And I'll just mention, of course, Dr. Weiss is available here on campus. And as he already mentioned at the start, he would be happy to continue the conversation beyond this Zoom. So you can find him on GGC's website. You might see him occasionally around campus as well, but you can certainly feel free to send him an email. And there is his email address in the chat box as well. He would be happy to talk with you. Dr. Weiss, thank you again for taking time out of your day to talk with us. This was incredibly informative, and I'm sure that folks got a lot out of it. So thank you again.
You're very welcome, and thank you for doing this. I think it's a great program. I mean, I just heard about this by chance and sat in on one of them. I was really impressed, and that's what drove me to say to you, hey, I'd be willing to do one. So it's a great program. Keep it up.
Great, thank you. And I appreciate it. And hopefully we will see all of you guys again in the future. So keep your ears open. It'll probably be in the fall when the next one happens, but I hope to have 1 or 2 coming up later on this year. And we will keep the conversation going. So thank you guys, and hope to see you all somewhere soon. Some of you guys I will see very shortly in a class that starts at 3:30. Everyone else, hope you guys have a good day. Thank you.
Thanks again. Bye.